Now turning to the agenda, item 1, apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Councillor Karen Lucioni, Isle of Wight. Oh, forgive me. No longer requiring an apology. Councillor Dan Poole, New Forest District Council. Councillor Gwen Robinson, Havant Borough Council, and Councillor Imogen Pater is attending as her deputy. Dave Stewart, Independent Co-operative Member. Item 2, are there any declarations of interest that any of the members of the panel wish to make? Thank you. Moving on to item 3, first item of business. This is the Police and Crime Appointments and Co-option report, items pages 5 to 10. This report from Democratic Services Officer is to the panel, sets out the membership of the panel for 23-24 municipal year, and the proposed appointment of the local authority co-opted members. Do members have any comments or questions? Racing on quickly. Members are now asked to vote on the following recommendations. Recommendations are on page 5. For those of you who don't have the notes, I'll read them out. Recommendation 1, that the panel notes its membership for 23-24 municipal year as laid out in table 2 of the report. 2, that Councillor Luigi Gregori and Councillor David Podger are appointed to the Hampshire Police and Crime Panel as local authority co-opted members, and Councillor Jack Davies and Councillor John Hutchison as deputy local authority co-opted members representing the Liberal Democrat group. 3, that, subject to the appointment proposed above, close bracket, the panel notes the panel membership is, at the current time, politically proportionate for the purposes of the balanced appointment objectives as outlined in table 3. What say you, panel?
Agree.
Thank you. I therefore invite Councillor Gregori and Councillor Podger to join the main table. Welcome, colleagues. Moving on to item 4, election of the chair. I now call for nominations and a seconder for chairman of the panel under the AGM until the AGM of 2024. What say you, panel? Thank you. Yes, the one on the right, or the left. Ooh.
Thank you. I would like to propose Councillor Woodward for chair.
Do I have any other nominations? Thank you.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Bound, and if I may, I'd like to say 2 words about why I'm nominating him. I'll proceed, if I may, until you interrupt me, Chair.
Does that close the relevant nominations for the chair at this stage? Any more takers?
Thank you. I'd just like to recap the fact I've been on this panel now for 2 years. I'm an independent co-opted member, and during my life in local government, I had 30 years at a senior management level, being managing director of a local authority. The reason why I draw your attention to that is during my interview for this post, I was very specific in that I asked whether or not this was a politically driven panel. And I was given an absolute assurance by the interviewing body that it was not a politically driven panel. And I'm delighted to say that I've found that neutrality for the last 2 years. I've also found a massive, immense amount of detail is required and experience to be able to manage this panel, to drive it, and to give scrutiny and support to the Office of the PCC. I think the current chairman has demonstrated that, beyond my wildest expectations, the personal qualities he brings to this post, as well as his independence, includes those of extreme scrutiny, fairness, and challenge and support when and if required. And it's for that I have no hesitation whatsoever in recommending that in this final year of a 3-year term of the PCC, that we continue with the stability we have, we continue with the challenge we have, and the massive amount of expertise and dedication that Councillor Bound brings to this post. I have therefore no hesitation whatsoever in recommending him to the post, and I would like to invite a seconder and to take a vote from then on. Thank you.
On the basis of fairness, before we move to a seconder, if anybody would wish to speak on behalf of Councillor Woodward, I would invite them to do so at this stage as a matter of balance. If not, I would invite seconders for Councillor Woodward and Councillor Bound. May I have your view, Councillor Woodward, as to whether you would wish to speak for yourself or anybody would wish to speak in your support?
Thank
Yeah.
microphone was going to work, which now it is. I've not been at a meeting before where proposers have then made speeches, so I dare say that probably wasn't expected and was rather abnormal, but I'm quite happy just to give a brief potted comment on myself, if that helps members.
I think I can't see your thing. Tanya, I can't see it that far. I think Tanya's right in the sense that a proposer should speak for you, Councillor Woodward. So I'm not going to invite you to speak for yourself, but anybody else can speak on your behalf as a proposer, if there is one.
So I'd just like to speak to my nomination of Councillor Woodward, having known him for many years as a councillor. I know he always does a good job. I think he's very dedicated to this panel and he's got the expertise that's needed to chair it. So I would recommend supporting Councillor Woodward.
Thank you. Could I have a formal seconder for Councillor Woodward, please? And could I have a formal seconder for Councillor Bound, please? Thank you. Could I move to a vote, please, for Councillor Woodward? Could those members... Oh, yes. Yeah. Could I move to a vote... I'll invite them to... Before I do a vote, would either of the proposed candidates wish to make a speech to the panel?
Thank you, Pete. I wanted to keep it brief, really, because I can sit here and say, can't I, those sort of technicalities as far as being on the panel since 2016, being the chair only in the last 2 years, the chair of the working plan group before that. But actually, I think it's really important to understand why people are on this panel. So actually, you know, having been the chair, I don't really talk very much about why I am on the panel. And I think it's probably very similar to why all of us are on this panel, which is actually, and lots of us as being elected members as well as making a difference. And that's a real challenge when what we're talking about in the population here is 2 million people. And that's really difficult to get in our heads, isn't it? So I often think about 2 people, and the 2 people who have a couple of moments in their life, moments where I interacted with them and moments when they interacted with the business of this panel. And they're 2 12-year-old boys who I interacted with them when they came to a youth club that I ran in a relatively deprived area of Basingstoke. And you know what, they were a bit cheeky and they broke some of the rules and we chucked them out and then we invited them back in again and we like to think we made a difference. The second moment fills me with dread because it was the moment that one of them became a murder victim and one of them became a murderer. And actually, I think about all of those moments that we discuss here and support the Commissioner, and through the Commissioner in her work supporting the criminal justice system, where we're trying to make sure everybody does their best. And actually, whether it's the moment where that person who wanted to report the crime and was handled by the call handler, so that that call handler could do their best in that moment, whether it be the person who received the job and got in the car and went and picked up that job and was the first officer on the scene, or the officer that spoke to the relatives, and how we all support them to do their best job. I believe everybody's here to help the Commissioner to do her best job. And I believe the role of the chair for this panel, and I'd like to think I've done that for the last 2 years, is to make sure that we do our best job. And that actually as individuals, that I do my job as chair to make sure that you can do your best job. Because a lot of what we're dealing with is pretty full on, pretty traumatic, and has an amazingly impactful moment in citizens' lives. So my objective is to make sure that we do our best, every member does their best, and probably, I think, if I thought about the people that talk to me about why do you do what you do, Simon, and how do you sleep at night, it's only with that that actually we can all go back and say, do you know what, when I get home, I did my best for those moments that are truly impactful in people's lives. And I see that as my role as the chair, and commit to doing that if I'm fortunate enough to be elected. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Councillor Bound. Councillor Woodward.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Just a bit of background. I've served for 8 years as a member of Hampshire Police Authority, which I found very insightful, very relevant in terms of policing. I've served as a lay visitor. My responsibilities on the police authority were finance, also looking after the police dogs, which was a really interesting role. I've been a councillor now for 38 years and leader of Fareham Borough Council for nearly 25. I chair the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Local Government Association, which is all of our local authorities where we meet on a regular basis. I also chair an organisation called the Partnership for South Hampshire, which is all local authorities in the south of the county. And what I would say, because I think it's very, very important to run any cross-party and no-party organisation in a very consensual manner. And if I say that within the Partnership for South Hampshire in those 20 years, and I've chaired it throughout, we've made some very, very difficult decisions for our local communities, and never have I had to have a vote in all of that time. So despite every flavour of party and none, we've always reached views by consensus, and I think that's a really important way to go forward. So I guess that's a little bit about me, and as far as the role is concerned, I think it's important that the panel and its chairman acts as a critical friend to the Police and Crime Commissioner, that it shouldn't be an adversarial role, it should be one where we truly hold that post holder to account, and that's what I would want to see the panel do very, very effectively. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Councillor Woodward. Could I now move to a vote relevant to the first candidate, Councillor Woodward? Thank you. Could I now move to a vote for Councillor Pound? Thank you. I confirm the votes were for Councillor Woodward 9 and for Councillor Simon Bound 8. Thank you. Councillor Woodward, would you like to move your chair, please? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for electing me as your chairman for this municipal year. I'd like to, I'll say a couple of words on the chairman's announcements, give me a chance to think of them. So just deal with the other items first before I get there. So the first one is at item 5, which is election of vice chairman. And I would like to propose from the chair, Councillor Leslie Minahan, and see if I have a seconder. I do, Councillor Imogen Pater. Do I have any other nominations for vice chairman? Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Craig. Okay. Councillor Vivian Atchwell is proposed. Is that seconded? That's seconded by Councillor Gregori. Any other nominations? Thank you very much. Then could I just take them in the order in which they were presented? So could I see please votes in favour of Councillor Leslie Minahan? And it is fine to vote for yourself, Councillor Minahan. Can we just try that one again? Hands up, please, for Chair, may I have an opportunity to, like we've just done, as in ask why I feel I should be? Oh, if you'd like to, absolutely, yes. Would you like to do that as well, Councillor Atchwell? Would you like to say a few words? Okay, well, I'll just ask, taken in the order they were presented then. So, Councillor Minahan, if you'd like to say a few words on your nomination, and then I'll move to Councillor Atchwell to say a few words on hers. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As a retired police officer, I am fully aware of the challenges facing the police at this time, and I am also aware of the residents' needs from the police service. With this balanced view, I believe I would make a good vice chair. Thank you.
Thank you. That was short and sweet. Councillor Atchwell.
Yeah, thank you. I know I'm new to the panel. I have been a councillor, Winchester City Councillor, since 2008. I've also been Mayor of Winchester City Council. I'm also Chairman of the North Whiteley Forum, so I'm quite aware how meetings work. I think we'd like to maybe have a bit of fresh face that's going on the panel, so I'd like to put my name forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then now we'll start voting again. So first of all then please those in favour of Councillor Leslie Minahan. Okay. And those in favour of Councillor Vivian Atchwell. More. Okay, then I can see that without knowing the numbers, so I declare Councillor Vivian Atchwell elected as Vice Chairman. Welcome. Is she going to come and sit with me? Right, and while Vivian is moving seats, can I just move quickly to item 6, then minutes of the previous meeting from page 11. Are members that were present at the last meeting happy that they form a correct record for this meeting? Is that agreed? I can see some of those that were here. Thank you very much. Right, I'm actually going to bring forward item 8 now before we deal with questions and deputations, because I think that's because there are a few words I'd like to say. And I'd like to start with a thank you to Councillor Simon Bound for his chairmanship of the Police and Crime Panel for the 2 years in which he has done that. So thank you very much, Simon, for your dedication in that role, which I know will continue. The second item is to give thanks to previous members of the panel, which is to Councillors Blunden, Gledhill and Vaughan, who haven't returned to the panel this year, and also to Stuart Bailey, who served on the panel from June 21 to June 23 and will remain as a deputy, and then to welcome all of the new members of the panel. And you know who you are, but obviously we've just brought two very new ones on today, so welcome especially to those co-opted members. And just to say that there will be an induction training event for all panel members ahead of our next meeting in October. Following the announcement of the recommendations of part 2 of the PCC review, our panel lead on producing and agreeing a combined submission to the Home Office from panel chairmen across the South East region, agreeing a combined submission to the Home Office. Following receipt, the Home Office and their consultancy team have been asked to attend a meeting of the South East region support officers, which will be hosted by Hampshire, and that I think took place earlier this week. Our panel's DSO also attended and contributed to a Home Office-led workshop on the development of that new support model. I'd also like to say a thank you to the Police and Crime Commissioner, Donna Jones, for arranging a fascinating visit for panel members to Netley, to the police training headquarters, very recently. And I know that there were some very interesting facts emerged there. We had a very interesting trip around the control room, which had changed dramatically, I must say, since I last saw it, and also saw some police training in the raw out in the grounds, which was really good to see. And also on the subject of our PCC, to congratulate her on her appointment as chairman of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. So those are my chairman's announcements. Just to reverse then, deputations and questions. I now am advised that there are no deputations or public questions that have been received for this meeting. So that brings us to item 9, which is the Police and Crime Commissioner's announcements. So, Commissioner, if you'd like to come forward and let us have your announcements. And I assume if somebody has a burning question on any of them, you'll be happy to answer it.
Good morning, panel members. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking a few minutes to get set up. I'd like to start, Chair, if you would just indulge me to say congratulations to you to becoming Chair, but also to Councillor Bound for the last 2 years that I've had to work with him. We've arranged the visit, as you just said, to Vickery Building. We also did the Marine Unit last year, and Councillor Bound put on the fantastic wetsuit and looked very dashing in it too. But actually, it's been really good to work with you. And I'd also like to echo the thanks to the panel members who've left and the welcome to those that have joined. So I will skim through my announcements fairly quickly because you've had them sent to you in advance, but just to sort of pick up since our last meeting, the things that have gone on over the last quarter. So in May, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, very importantly, with our new Chief Constable who started on the 28th of February, Scott Chilton, committed to really driving forward the relentless pursuit of criminals, which is one of his 3 new pledges, as you know. There was a 31 days of action throughout the month of May, and that really drove up the visibility of policing, as exactly as I've asked the Chief Constable to do. It really did achieve some very significant results, with 438 arrests on top of those that would normally occur for the month of May, an additional 1,260 intel submissions. Again, we normally get about 800 a month, so you can see the percentage increase there. 1,305 seizures, that's of drugs, cash, guns, knives, whatever it may be, and 1,321 enforcement actions, with over 14,500 engagements with victims or members of the public that may have been feeding intelligence into the force. So it really was setting his mark with his new operating model. I was very grateful to award a £1 million co-commission contract with the Probation Service and Public Health to launch the county's first, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight's first wide stalking and domestic abuse programme. The stalking work that was done prior to my tenure was very much on working with victims of stalking, and I truly believe that the best way to help victims of stalking is to prevent them from being victims in the first place, and so we've got very much a perpetrator-led programme to try and work with perpetrators of stalking, because very often it can be connected to mental health as well. I have purchased e-bikes, as you will have seen probably from social media, for a number of the neighbourhood enforcement teams, and this really came from the Isle of Wight, being a very hilly and very large geographical area where they were really struggling, even on mountain bikes, to be out, so they would often opt for the car rather than a bike. The public likes seeing them on bikes because they're easier to speak to and stop if they want to, and also the visibility. So I've purchased e-bikes for a number of the neighbourhood policing teams, and the Isle of Wight was the first area to get theirs, and they've gone down very well. Public are also telling us they like it. Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary increased their stop and search. That's because we had OPSEPTA, so you know the 2 national weeks of action around knife crime. We seized an additional 123 knives during that week of action, and 17 arrests made, more than the previous Operation SEPTA week. So some good outcomes there as well. The speed cameras that I had previously pledged for the A32 and the A272 have been installed. That was following £677,000 that you'll remember I signed off from the Safer Roads Policing Fund, which is the income that comes to me from a levy on speeding fines, which the public across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight have to pay. And that really is about tackling road safety. As you know, that is a pledge in my police and crime plan as well. I've covered a big piece in Police Oracle, which is an online, for those of you that haven't looked at it, it's worth having a look at. Police Oracle is an online news forum for policing, and I worked with National Emergency Services across the country as the lead commissioner to get an amendment put into the Levelling Up Bill, so that emergency services are recognised national infrastructure partners, so that we're able to have a seat around the table for the negotiations of Section 106 and SIL payments, and the new replacement to Section 106 and SIL that's coming in. Moving on to June, we had Volunteers Week. A number of you celebrated volunteers as well. I won't sort of dwell on that one. I visited Motivate Charity in Gosport to see some of the really key work they're doing in tackling harm with young people. Scott Chilton, Chief Constable, went go live on his new operating model, and you've all been invited, or for those newer members, you will be sent the date from Caroline for a meeting with myself and the Chief Constable in September, where we're going to take you through the new operating model in quite some detail, and also introduce you all to your new district commanders. That extends to independent members as well. Obviously, you're very welcome. And I think it's really important that you do all know how and why we've changed the the Chief Constable has changed the operating model of the police force, and that is to really tackle crime and drive up visibility. So I hope that you will be pleased with the way the force is now going to be operating, and within weeks notice the difference. The Chief Constable also launched the new Policing Plus, first police force in the country, to introduce a replacement for the previous mandatory police degree, so that new recruits coming into Hampshire do not need to take a police degree. And this is a new qualification based at sort of level 5, like an apprenticeship, very akin to the previous apprenticeship in accordance with apprenticeship levy rules. The Chief Constable re-signed the Armed Forces Covenant, and I did that in April as well, both giving our commitment to try and welcome military personnel into the force. I opened another grants round, which I know several of your councils have been into. It was my Commissioner's Emerging Needs Fund, and it was really focused at tackling knife crime and serious violence. Actually, Councillor Bound, I know your council, particularly the work that you've done over the last sort of 8-9 months, that's really feeding into, I think, hopefully some work we're going to be doing with you in Basingstoke. I've also pledged £5,000 to tackle antisocial behaviour, particularly in Rushmore, because obviously we'd had issues there, and I've been approached by the council there, and we've launched something there for the summer period. I visited Network Ride, of course, Councillor Lucioni, your portfolio, and the joint work I'm paying there with your council as well through your budget. I've supported the Home Secretary's direction for the enhanced powers for stop and search to tackle knife crime. Perhaps we'll talk about this at some other point, but the endemic of carrying knives in this country is very, very worrying to me, and I'm sure many of you, and we need to get tougher on that stuff. The 100% burglary commitment, I won't pause on that one, you know about that, we sort of ramped that up again. Thank you for the independent custody visitors, and I've also met with over 20 different residents on the Isle of Wight for a very specific constituency meeting about issues. And finally, July, to bring us up to date, supporting ASB Awareness Week. As you know, I set up the first ASB Task Force board in the country, run by a Commissioner, with that £200,000, which paid for things such as the e-bikes, the Rushmore summer campaign, the Network Ride stuff. I'm working on some stuff with Port City Council at the moment in terms of cameras for speeding vehicles that's racing around in the evenings, and several of you have got that in your patch. Please do put bids into me. Cameras for Winchester, for the town centre, working with the bid and with Winchester City Council as well. So the Prime Minister's ASB task force, I fed into number 10 around what I was doing here, the terms of reference for the board that I set up, and particularly with the Secretary of State for Levelling Up and local communities. They've looked at the terms of reference of what we've done here and are basing that on some of the national rollout as well. The Chief Constable, I assisted the Chief Constable in the recruitment day of the new Deputy Chief Constable. The Deputy Chief Constable of Dorset has been appointed. Her name is Sam Durea, and she starts on the 7th of August. Chief Constable appointment, but I was on the panel assisting him. It was his decision. I attended the Police Federation AGM, and really the main takeaways from that were obviously their dissatisfaction around the cost of living crisis, inflation, and police pay. I'd already been lobbying in with the Home Secretary around police pay, and I gave them an undertaking that I would do everything I could, particularly obviously as police officers do not have the right to strike, which other parts of the public sector do, and I think they were feeling perhaps their voice wasn't as strong as others. I'm very pleased that last week there was a confirmation from the Policing Minister, Chris Philp, of a 7% pay rise. They've had one pay rise in 4 years, so while 7% sounds like it's good, and it is good, we just need to contextualise that in terms of what they've had in the last 4 years as well. And I've opened up another round, a more general grants round, which again, please do bid into, anything from £5,000 to £25,000 for initiatives in your areas, or for parish and town councils as well, around crime prevention. And finally, yes, the work doing with Port City Council on that motorbike stuff. The Hope Street, the new female bail hostel in Southampton, was opened by the Princess of Wales. I was very honoured to be invited to the opening of that, and I went along with the leader of Southampton City Council, so we were there together. I've introduced drug testing on arrest into custody, so I've signed off a new contract working with public health. So if you are arrested anywhere in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight for an acquisitive crime, car theft, shoplifting, burglary, anything related to dishonesty effectively, you will be tested in custody for drugs in your system. It's a swab test in the mouth, and you get an instant readout from that. If you refuse to be swabbed, then effectively it's taken as if you have got drugs in your system and you are charged for failure to provide a sample, a bit like with drink driving. If you do test positive for, it's mainly amphetamine, cocaine, heroin based, we are looking at rolling that out potentially to cannabis based drugs as well in the future. If you do test positive, you are not charged. You are offered, as long as you agree to interact with a drug treatment program and go and get some help and support. This is not about trying to penalise instantly for individual drug use. This is about trying to get people off drugs long term, and so I'm paying for some work with public health on that. So thank you to all the public health directors across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight for their support. I attended the National Crime and Policing Board on Monday in my role as chair of the national chair of the APCC, a role I was elected into last Wednesday. Finally, so I'm no longer now the victims lead nationally or the national lead for serious and organised crime, because I have taken on that national chair role. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. I said if there were any quick questions, we might take them. I've only seen one hand up, Matt Renyard from Southampton.
No. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Donna, for those announcements. Just a whistle-stop tour, if I may. I'm pleased to see the drug testing with the drug program to follow the treatment program. I think that's a really good initiative. Also, very pleased to see the Police Plus. I think that's long overdue. I think it's time that we got a wide variety of people into the force that could really serve that, and maybe hang around in the neighbourhood policing teams, because I think we desperately need to see that. So thank you for those. I have a couple of questions, if I may. The first one is on the visibility. I think that clearly shows that that was quite a successful operation. I'm hoping that we can continue to see more of that. I believe that will quite possibly fit in with your new operating model. So just wanted to see if there are any more thoughts on that from you to start with, and then I can offer all three at once if you like.
I'm happy to do it if you want me to. Okay. Yeah. So I completely agree with you. The 31 days of intensive pursuit of criminals. So you probably would have seen on the force's social media, they sort of took media crews out with them. So they were, filming them without trying to sound too coarse, like bashing in doors and doing those sorts of things. Those dawn raids at sort of 5:30, 6 in the morning. That is now business as usual. The Chief Constable will go through that with you in due course. But yes, we really pushed it on social media. So it is still going on now. And actually the police have responded so well to being reinvigorated and encouraged to be able to have more overtime, to stand up extra officers, to, because they all have to get in at 5 for the brief. I shouldn't go into that detail actually, but anyway, things happen and they get briefed. But, they are really invigorated by this. It's gone down very well in the force. So yes, it is business as usual, and I'm pleased that you noticed it. So thank you.
Did you have another point, Matt?
Thanks. And my second question was around the 100% burglary attendance. I'm kind of curious what kind of pressures that's putting on the day-to-day business for the force generally. It's quite a large commitment, and just wanted your feelings or thoughts on that. And also, on top of that, if I could just also request a brief breakdown on the knife seizures stop and search at a later date, that'd be great.
Thank you very much. So the knife seizures I'll do outside of the meeting, if that's okay, because it's obviously about specific numbers. Southampton obviously is the largest metropolitan area in Hampshire, and you have the largest number of offences related to knives. And Portsmouth is a close second, but you do have the largest number, so we will get those figures for you, because I know it's very relevant to the work that you, Chris Brown, and your officers are doing. In terms of burglary, how do officers feel about it, and what's the impact? Well, actually, how do they feel about it? I think initially, this is going to be more onerous if we have to turn up to every single one, even if we know that there's potentially not a line of inquiry to follow. But now they're starting to really see that there is a benefit to that. So it's done in two parts. So when something has been burgled and you obviously phone up and you say, I've just got home, or it's the middle of the night and you're phoning whatever, it will be responsible patrol officers that will turn up. So they've had to be upskilled in some of the specialist detection work that you need to look out for at that first point of sort of contact with a victim. What we've then got, secondary to that, and have always had actually, is a team called Operation Hawk, and they are specialist trained detectives who will look at burglary scenes. And very often with burglars, without, again, trying to be coarse, it's a bit like some serial killers where they have a style and a mark of the way that they do things. So certain burglars will use a certain crowbar, or so, you can see that the entry point into the window is exactly the same size, and and then they can try and use those sort of things to connect to spater burglaries, or they'll go in always via the back door, or they'll try and go in through a certain window or whatever. So burglars tend to have their style. And that's why the Operation Hawk teams will be piecing together outstanding burglaries, perhaps in that area or across the whole county. And they do also share information with forces outside as well. So if you're someone in the New Forest, spater burglaries, as they had in earlier this year, they will connect that to Dorset Police and Wiltshire to make sure that there's not that. So the police are good with it. They're fine with it. I think at the moment we are at about 98%. That's owing, again, because people are away on holiday, so they can't always let us get in. But the force is aiming, obviously, to always be at 100%.
Okay.
Chair, if I may, just to add a little bit of depth to that answer. It's also worth as well, something that I think is really dear probably to everybody's heart around the table, is it's not just the initial attendance there, but it's the opportunity to provide the preventative element, which I think is really important, not just from a commissioner's perspective, but from a force perspective, and I think from a local councillor's perspective as well. It's not just the impact and the support for individual victims, it's the opportunity to have contact and establish relationships with the wider community, not least through those house-to-house inquiries as well, which I think is really, really important in terms of where we're all trying to strive towards here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're happy with that? Yes. Okay. I have got two other members that had questions, but in the interest of making progress, Donna's about to give a presentation on effective and efficient policing. I've got Karen Lucioni and Alan Oliver. Would you mind if you're the first questioners once she's done that as well, and then take all the questions at once? So over to you for the next item, Donna.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Pete to take us through the slides.
Thank you, Chair. Just noting there's two item agendas here, 10 and 11. Would you like us to pause in terms of presentation? One rolls into the other, but
well, if that works for you, then please roll them together.
Okay, so by way of introduction to item agenda item 10 for efficient and effective policing, just a refresh there in terms of where we are for that programme of work that's been agreed through this panel, and we're going to touch or crack down on authorised encampments and tackling rural crime this presentation after we've gone through the initial slides. So maybe for new panel members, by way of an introduction, not a familiar slide, but just to briefly introduce this. This is a way in the office that we use as a dashboard to track and monitor the Commissioner's police and crime plans. There's over 120 different objectives that sit within the plan, and this is just a highlight that we've been asked to bring before in terms of where we were last panel meeting and where we are in this panel meeting, noting that this took us up to the end of the first quarter of this year. Just I suppose a reminder that evidence does not necessarily mean that there isn't further work. It just means that we've reached a point to the Commissioner's satisfaction that particular area in the police and crime plan has been evidenced. Doesn't mean to say that we've stopped doing work on it. So that doesn't mean to say that we've got 20% necessarily more work to do. It means that actually some of those, or a lot of those areas, as you probably heard through previous updates and will hear today, that those areas of work within the office of the team and through the Commissioner continue. So for effective and efficient police service, this was an additional part of the work programme that was asked of the panel and the working group from last time, and a request to bring back to this panel an oversight of the peel inspection that took place within the force for 21-22, and how the Commissioner is overseeing that and holding the constabulary to account. So I'm going to pass back to the Commissioner for the next few slides.
Thank you very much indeed. So one of the things that you asked me to bring to you was the update on the peel inspection that we've had. So I just wanted to set the context, particularly for newer members, around the peel inspections. It's much akin to Ofsted. When Ofsted go into schools, it's very much that kind of inspection of police forces. It's had several big iterations and changes. So the new peel inspection came in about 2 years ago, dramatically different to how it was before. We were in round 2 of the peel inspections. They normally inspect about 4 or 5 forces at a time in that sort of 8-9 month period. We were phase 2, as I said. So through phase 1 and through phase 2 of those, so 10 forces effectively they had inspected, they realised that actually the inspection regime wasn't quite right. So they have now changed for phase 3, those forces that are being inspected now, because it wasn't focused enough on the public and what the public wanted. It was very much about retired police officers who work for HMIC looking at other police forces and looking internally at how they were doing things, organising their deck chairs, how they're running CID, for example. There wasn't enough emphasis on how it affected the public trust and confidence. And as you know, increasing trust and confidence in policing is a government priority, therefore it is a priority for the Home Office and for HMI CFRS. So we were inspected on the now old new regime, if that makes sense, that came in 2 years ago, and they have since changed it. So if we were inspected on the new one that they started about 4 months ago, our results would be better than they are here. Having said that, what I want to say to clarify for the panel is that what you've got in front of you is very common, and this is actually pretty okay in terms of the, I think there's 1 or 2 in the country that have been better than us, that have had all goods and 1 adequate, but actually what you've got here in front of you is pretty commonplace for police forces. So there were a number, in terms of the requirements, I'm not going to dwell on the good and the adequates unless you want, you can ask me questions about that afterwards if you'd like to. They, kind of speak for themselves, and we'll go into more detail. What I'm sure you're interested in is where we need to get better and improve. So those are the ones I'm going to talk to you about now. So in terms of preventing crime, one of the things that we were criticised for in terms of why we didn't do good enough or better in preventing crime was because of our frequent abstraction of neighbourhood policing officers being abstracted to response and patrol to respond to 999 calls and 101 calls. And obviously you will know, as the people who have relationships with neighbourhood policing teams, it's frustrating when they don't turn up to a parish council meeting. It's frustrating if they don't turn up to one of your meetings, or if you, because they are being abstracted off to go and respond to emergency and semi-emergency calls. So that was one of the things where HMIC did a bit of a deep dive into the hours and the number of hours of abstraction from neighbourhood policing teams being pulled into RMP, response patrol. So that's something that the Chief Constable, that's why another reason to change the operating model that we now have, so that the District Commander has the control of both response patrol and neighbourhoods, and it's down to the local Chief Police Officer to decide where they put their resource and not them being abstracted by the control room. And in September we'll go into that with even more detail with you. Number 2, responding to the public. Well, this is it's a bit techie, and I don't know a lot about it, but I've got 2 people either side of me that know far more as retired police officers than I do here. But I'm going to give you the very high level explanation. When police officers are looking at crimes, they use a problem-solving model called SARA. It's a national model, and HMIC felt like when crimes were being reported, that Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary was not using the model as well as they could have done, weren't using it adequately on the ground, and they basically said we just need to adapt the way that we're responding to the SARA model. And they are really the two key points. So in some ways, it's quite handy that what they've given us is very specifics in terms of why they gave us the grading that they did on those two areas. The Chief and I have discussed this at length, and I have to say, whilst you wouldn't have all known it's because of the interpretation of the SARA model, what you've all told me and the public have told me through casework and surgery appointments and everything else that I have in conversations with you and your colleagues and council leaders is that the public are frustrated that the police weren't turning up to crimes that they felt like they should have been. That's all about how you judge the risk when the call comes in. And you'll remember me talking to you, particularly those of you that have been on the panel for some time, around how when I arrived here, the force was a high harm force, as in we have only got the capacity to deal with this stuff. And I was sort of like, well, 600 more police, we kind of need to be doing the whole lot now. We need to be doing the low, the medium and the high. So these things will get resolved through the new model and through the extra police officers that we've had over the last 2 to 3 years. No criticism on my part from anybody, noted reports. And I have to say, I've met with HMIC. I obviously know our regional lead inspector, a guy called Pete, meet with him, speak to him on a regular basis. And having gone through the debrief with them and having gone through the prep before they started the inspection, I think what you've got in front of you is a fair assessment of where the force was, and we will be re-inspected within 12 months. So you'll get another report in due course to see probably this time next year. I'll carry on. So the next one, this gives you the national context around, so I was explaining to you that where we were was fairly commonplace. You can see here that 82% of our inspection said that we were either adequate or good, so we're doing what we needed to do. So on the whole, it is positive, and you can see that there are other forces in the country who have far more inadequates or adequates than we had, and some of them with no goods or some goods. And there are, as I say, forces who are placed in what we call engaged. So from an Ofsted perspective, that would be into that requires improvement, where perhaps a new head teacher needs to get put into a school. That's what's called engaged within HMI CFRS. And actually our Chief Constable, Scott Chilton, has just taken on the National Police Chiefs Council portfolio for the engaged forces. So he's working very closely with a retired Chief Constable called Andy Cook, who's now the Chief Inspector for the UK government, and Scott is his national Chief Constable lead on that. So Scott is working very closely with those engaged forces, which of course will just help because he'll pick up good learning from other forces on things that we can do here too. And the last one, the slide from me before I hand back to Pete, is just to give you sort of the local context, really. I've already touched on some of this. We are one of the poorest funded forces in the country, as you know. So we get £42 million a year funding less than what we call our MSG. So in police forces, it's called your most similar groups. So for example, Durham is a MSG for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary, and we are £42 million funded less than they are. Now, the government are aware of this, and a police funding formula review was conducted in conjunction with Bristol University last year. It concluded, and the report was received by the Home Office at the beginning of this year. It's currently with number 10, and we're just waiting for sign-off for that to go public, so they can consult on the outcomes of that, and then hopefully the blending in. And for us, we'd be very, very unlucky to come out of that worse off than we are now. So from my perspective, I'm really pushing, and I met with the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister on Wednesday morning, and again, I asked them very specifically about this, when is it going to get published? So we're waiting for that now. The second point is just about the force conducting and undertaking that work around capability and capacity. That has been done because obviously I've asked the Chief Constable to do that. So just so you know, in terms of me undertaking my role as Police and Crime Commissioner and holding the Chief to account around improvements that I think need to happen. Chase.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick slides from me just to add to what you've already had from the Commissioner, if that's okay. So, Chair, members, in relation to a governance regime, as Donna's already alluded to, not only is this about the interplay between the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary, but this is absolutely fundamental in terms of ultimately how Donna as the PCC is holding Scott as the Chief Constable to account through the 2011 Act and also through the policing protocol. So if you kind of just see this as a little bit of a pyramid, if you could, for those of you that actually read the detail of the report or are just aware of the summary, essentially what you can see at the bottom of that pyramid, as it were, essentially are the key areas that have been highlighted by HMIC FRS as the areas for improvement. And the bits that I just wanted to highlight here is just to kind of point this out, are what you see essentially is chief officer, i.e. assistant chief constable or assistant chief officer level ownership of each of these areas for improvement. So it's right at the top of the organisation in terms of how this is now being taken forward, in terms of ultimately those people being direct in minds and accountable ultimately to the chief constable and ultimately to the commissioner. But also as well, excuse me, some of you, the longest standing members, will be aware that we went through a restructure approximately 12, 18 months or so ago. But this is also the operating environment for my and Donna's senior leadership team and senior managers. So we've recruited people that actually have the knowledge and experience and skills to operate in this arena alongside those assistant chief officers, ultimately the eyes and the ears and ultimately the oversight on behalf of the commissioner. So as you kind of move up through that pyramid there, very much this reflects the professional relationship between myself as the chief executive on Donna's behalf with the Deputy Chief Constable ultimately as the Chief Operating Officer for the force. And you can see where I come into that ultimately in terms of the interplay with the Deputy Chief Constable there every 8 weeks in terms of the steering group and making sure that she is actually applying the relevant grip and forward direction of travel for that. But we also pick that up on at least a monthly basis during our one-to-ones. And then as you get to the top of that, ultimately that's the more formal avenues there in terms of the accountability, in terms of how these areas for improvement are being taken forward between the relationship between the PCC and the Chief Constable. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of assurance or reassurance about ultimately the governance arrangements and how serious we are about taking this forward. The final slide I won't dwell on because I think Donna's covered most of this either in her announcements or the narrative a few moments ago. But kind of going left to right there, you'll get more detail, as said, around the September period in terms of the changes in the operating model and ultimately how that will underpin the areas for improvement and how things develop within the constabulary. More detail will come in relation to what's being done in the contact management space, not least in the next panel meeting. But I just wanted to just for a little moment or two in relation to, or at least just mention where you see there about the investigative standards. Again, that is a bespoke piece of work that's being led again by an assistant chief constable to ensure ultimately better outcomes and better service for victims. And then the bit there that I think again is really dear to policing, to the Commissioner, but also for yourselves in terms of your own roles, because I think this is common ground for us all here, is about ultimately trying to drive public trust and confidence in everything that we do. And again, that is being led by an Assistant Chief Officer as well. So that's probably all I was going to say, other than just to say, I think as well, which is new space for us as the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Donna mentioned our relationship with essentially the link man, Pete, as she mentioned. That is essentially somebody that works alongside lots and lots of police forces. We now have, I think, quite a strong relationship, which is being driven by the Commissioner as well. And I think that's quite a good space and quite a unique space for us to operate in as well, because it kind of completes the circle ultimately in terms of the holding to account. Thank you.
Just to quickly follow on from that, in terms of the left to right up there, these are sort of the force's main large project areas to get ready for the re-inspection. Now, the first one, introducing the new operating model, of course, we're going to do a deep dive with you in September on that one, so you will understand completely, as I say, the nuances of that. The investment in contact management, you have that on your agenda for your October meeting, so we're going to go into a deep dive with that with you in October, and with your permission, Chair, and the panel's permission, I would like to bring the Chief Constable with me to the October meeting so that he can go through and answer some of those more nuanced operational questions you may have to enhance your understanding understanding around what is going on within contact management. The next one, the dedicated programme, as we just heard, around the increasing investigative standards. That one, I mean, if you want to put that on to subsequent meeting, perhaps, you know, your December, January, whatever one, that's up to you, your call. But again, I can bring Assistant Chief Constable Stuart Murray to come and do that one. The other two are sort of the back office-y, like more kind of behaviour type stuff. But those three are very specific programmes which we can go into with you if you would like us to, but I'll leave that at your discretion. That's it, Pete. Yeah, thank you very much. That's it, Chair.
Okay, and Pete, you were going to roll into item 11 as well, and then we'll take questions on all of it.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel. So this is an update on the agreed programme of work for performance and delivery against the police and crime plan, specifically tackling unauthorised encampments and targeting rural crimes, which I'll come to respectively. So further to the main dashboard that I displayed a couple of slides ago, this is, I suppose, drilling down into a bit more of the detail, individual projects areas. This is, again, very much an internal monitoring and tracking system, but shared with you because I think feedback previously that's been useful in terms of progress from where we were previous quarters and progress from where we are now. So going through to the detail, and I've just put on the left-hand side there some of the questions that came through from the working group and the panel previously, and very grateful for that because it's very much helped and assisted us shaping and moulding the presentation to you to make sure that you get the areas that you need there. So tackling unauthorised encampments, as many of the panel members will be aware, is that unauthorised encampments are quite a seasonal event for our two counties. A lot of that is around, often around the Wickham Horse Fair. So in terms of the new legislation that took place or came in last year, and the Constabulary's operational response to that, then on behalf of the Commissioner, we've been sort of tracking that in terms of the development of how the force have implemented that new legislation and how that's been implemented operationally. Of course, the operational independence of the Constabulary, but in terms of how that's being delivered out on the ground. From the Commissioner's perspective, and I appreciate that some, at least one councillor here I can remember, were part of the partner and local authority coordination meetings that the Commissioner put together last year, and this was bringing in civil servant support, special advisor, the SPAD, to assist and help navigate the changes in legislation. That was predominantly around the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, CJPO of 1994, and around Section 60C, without going into any further detail around that. Essentially the third point down there on the right-hand side about the changes in legislation was particularly around a point of impact being significant and the decisions that operational officers had to take on the ground, or senior officers on the ground, as to the significant impact of any particular unauthorised encampment when police were taking action there. So the Commission also looked at and considered what of those local proposals that she was coordinating had an impact on the public service quality duty and or likely to decrease local council, local authority or police obligations in relation to vulnerability of adults and children. Because of course that's important in terms of unauthorised encampments, because sometimes I know, having been there, that it can get lost in terms of those members of the Gypsy Romney traveller community who have with them sometimes some vulnerability that we very much need to consider and help them with. There was a presentation to the Commissioner from Hampshire Constabulary in terms of their review of the strategy in light of the changes under the part of challenge and support Hampshire Constabulary within a police and crime plan. Also explored some funding opportunities and also invited some presentations and examination of other models and approaches, Durham and Test Valley being two of those, and incorporated legal advice into that, and trying to give partners and local authorities some options and other considerations. Certainly for those of you who were involved in that, you remember conversations around stopping places and versus transit sites, and how that was how that was examined, looking for opportunities in there in terms of that sort of coordinated, fair and proportionate approach in dealing with unauthorised encampments. And finally, from a forces perspective, I'm in contact on behalf of the Commissioner quite often with the tactical lead, who's given presentations to various local authorities and parish councils, helping through that navigation of the legislation and also understanding, I guess, between police and local authorities about what some of the challenges are in dealing with unauthorised encampments, and also given some help and advice around some of those more frequent locations that have unauthorised encampments in terms of target hardening and supporting some of the local issues. So there's a request from the working group to provide some data showing the number of unauthorised encampments by local authority area. Appreciate panel members would have seen this ahead on there, so didn't intend to go through this in any great detail. The point I would make here about the data is that this will only show, or it only shows where consideration of police powers have been invoked. So clearly local authorities and district councils have a role in this as well, and no doubt we'll have some different data there if you're looking at from your perspective and think, well, actually, I think we may have had more than that, then you quite possibly would have done. But this is where essentially the police track and monitor their use of a specific power in a particular area, and therefore the absence of an unauthorised encampment there in a particular area, or the fact that one area has had more, is not necessarily a measure of success. And I think we discussed this at the working group in terms of from a policing perspective, it's about the assessment, it's about the impact on the area, it's about the roles and responsibilities that the local authorities have in relation to this on encampments in their own land, and again working to ensure that any police powers are used in a fair and proportionate way. So like I say, the absence of data doesn't mean necessarily say that an unauthorised encampment hasn't taken place. It's just the ones that the police have been involved with. So last panel meeting, we went through some case studies, which the feedback of was largely positive. So I thought I'd put in something similar here for the Commissioner, and as the Commissioner's had personal experience of this one in Gosport, I'll have the Commissioner just to talk through this.
Thank you. Yes, both Fareham and Gosport councils were affected by incursions on their land going back last month, which had quite significant impact. Both Councillor Pepper and Councillor Woodward were in contact with me very quickly. It did result in me being on the phone to the Contact Management Centre on Saturday evening for you, Councillor Woodward. Councillor Pepper, you'd contacted me a couple of days before that and obviously worked with you directly on your site too. So we thought that the encampment that happened, the unauthorised encampment that happened in Nobes Lane in Bridgemerry was quite a good one to use because the community impact was actually quite significant. So I wanted to give you an example of what happened and then what has happened since that will hopefully sort things out and make it a bit better when these things happen in the future. So obviously, for those of you that don't know, under the Police Crime Sentencing Courts Bill, which was a new piece of legislation that went through in 2022, the powers around for the police with unauthorised encampments changed. We were hoping it was going to be a more impactful piece of legislation than it was. Unfortunately, the wording of the legislation was not as originally had hoped, and therefore the police powers were not increased as much as we hoped. Anyway, what was an improvement was that where any individual has gained access to a piece of land for which they intend to reside without lawful permission, the police are now able to, if it meets the section 61 or 62 assessment, as Pete's referred to, it means the police can now ban the individuals named from returning to that site for a 12-month period, whereas before it was only for 6 months. Secondly, to meet the impactful assessment under section 61 and 62, previously there had to be 12 vehicles. That could be cars, vans, lorries and or caravans. It had to be 12 vehicles or more. It's now 6. So you can see that they can now ban for twice as long and they only need to have half as many vehicles. So actually that has made it a bit easier, but the word significant has remained in the legislation. Now, you remember me telling you before that when the new legislation came in and the police sort of said to me, it's not really helped us that much. And I said, well, why? And I went through with the four solicitor why, and there was the word significant impact remained in there. I fed that back to the Home Office, to the previous Home Secretary, and to her special advisors. And actually, in a catch-up I had with number 10, 3 weeks ago, they are looking at this again. So they'd contacted me to say, can you tell us what it is about this that doesn't work? How the police are interpreting it. So I'm working with them now on exactly what nuance in the legislation is not working. Second, will not help the police. Secondly to that, now that MP Esther McVeigh is no longer government minister, I've also been talking to her about it. So I'll keep you posted on the legalities of this. Anyway, back to the case study. So there was the unauthorised encampment actually it was in June, beg your pardon, end of June, in Nobes Lane in Bridge Mary, which did lead to police action being taken eventually, because Councillor Pepper, you'll remember the assessment was done on day one, and at that point the significant impact to the local community had not been met, but very quickly it escalated, with 3 pubs having to close temporarily, which is the Green Dragon, the White Horse and the Carisbrooke Arms, because of trouble in the local community, and the community impact increased. So the Section 61 assessment was then undertaken again on day 4 or 5, and then the threshold was met. So what's happened out of this is that the relationship obviously that I have with you as councillors is very key when you're feeding these things back to me and the people that support me in my office. I have sat down and gone through these examples with the Chief Constable, and he has issued a direction out to the district commanders around their use of Section 61 powers, to just remind them exactly what they are and those new powers, to make sure that they understand that. So that was the example there. As Pete has said, you did ask for us to bring them to you. I hope that's helpful. And so yes, on day one, the impact wasn't significant enough, but it had escalated and changed. Really, from my perspective, being completely honest, I think it probably could have been done 24 hours earlier. Actually, I don't know, you may give me your feedback on that in a minute. But, I think it probably could have been done a bit earlier, and that was kind of where I was explaining that to the Chief Constable. Pete.
Thank you. Moving on to targeting rural crimes. So as with the other areas, again, update on the progress there. Again, just an internal way of tracking this through. Noting there's a lag there now in terms of Q1 and where we are in July. Commissioner thought it might be helpful just to put this slide up in terms of rural policing and rural beats, and my apologies to the good community of Basingstoke and Dean, because that just says Basingstoke on there, not Basingstoke and Dean, so I do apologise for that.
But also you're both rural and urban.
Yes, sits in both. I guess. So just wanted to clarify from a policing perspective. This is not an OPCC. This is a policing perspective in terms of what are rural beats. And to save you counting, there are 7 in rural and six in urban. And as the Commissioner just pointed out, some sit within both, and there's no real assessment in terms of what makes them one in rural and one in urban. It's a combination of geographical mapping as well as a bit of experience and knowledge locally. However, we talk a lot, the Commissioner talks a lot about rural policing and support for the rural areas, and I think it just probably demonstrates what a split there is in the 2 counties there. And I suppose from a policing perspective, we talk about rural crime, and that is crime that is maybe bespoke or particular to rural areas. So that could include things like theft of agricultural equipment, but there are also crime that takes place in rural areas, and there's a real difference between the two. Not in terms of the approach and the response that people get, and also the investigation that follows as a result of that. But I guess the importance there is recognising from a policing perspective and a PCC and OPCC perspective that there is a difference, and those communities within rural areas sometimes do need a different approach to assist them. So on to a bit more detail, and again, the left-hand area there, the column there was the information that the working group and the panel have asked us to bring today. So I don't propose, because I know you've had the pack already, to read any of this out line by line, but I guess just to add to some of the narrative that's on the screen there is that PCC funds a rural research and analyst, within the force, and I know from personal experience that they are really worth their weight in gold, because these are the people that look at data, they analyse it, they evaluate it, and they actually give you a product which can go away and tell you where a hotspot is, or tell you where something's happening. So from a policing perspective, that's a really, really valuable role, that work that then informs the operational activity that takes place as part of that, and the PCC has funded that. And a good example of that was just last month, where as a result of some of that data analysis, an operation that was identified as a seasonal priority due to the impact on farmers and those that rely on a sort of livelihood within the industry, where an operation took place from around some fishing and poaching, with some real positive results, and some offenders were apprehended and going through the criminal justice system at the moment. That was a direct result of some of that analyst work. Also, for those members that were here, will recall back in May's panel that we spoke about DISC. That was that online platform that was supported by the Commissioner to increase that engagement between business and retail. Well, that also happens within the rural areas as well. So that engagement between the two rural businesses and Country Watch, we've got over 650 subscribers to that as a two-way system, allowing for the reporting as well as the news alerts, and a police for the tools for the police to be able to share information. I guess linked to that was the rural crime survey that you see there on about midway down the bullet points there. And interesting, I think, that came out of that was that not only was that the first time that we'd had 100% respondents, as in all the respondents had completed the survey, but some of the feedback there was that policing visibility is not just about seeing police officers, it's also about the engagement linked into those online platforms and other opportunities of engaging with the rural community. And I guess that makes sense, because if you're in a rural community, then perhaps you're not going to see necessarily a police car going by, or a police officer or PCSO on foot, but you might feel engaged and connected in other ways, which has been fed back through that survey. And to put up there another case study or example, and I appreciate you may feel that Pete suggesting this was stretching this as a case study, but it is a good example, I think, in terms of ways that the Commissioner is supporting not only the police visibility in the response to this, but also the rural community in terms of that assistance with kit and equipment. Having again been there myself, I know how welcomed it is to have the right kit, right tools to do the right job. In this case, some vehicles that I think not only have allowed officers to increase their visibility, have a vehicle that offers some incident support maybe in some remote areas, have a platform for launching their drones, which I'll talk about in a moment, but also sort of crossing over with other areas, certainly within the police and crime plan around antisocial behaviour, which of course does take place in all areas, including those rural areas, and other crime types as well, because we know unfortunately that rural areas do sometimes get targeted by those organised crime groups, and there's a much bigger picture there linking back into the intelligence piece, and also the Country Watch officers that link into that in terms of being targeted by those organised crime groups. Just to add to that, and I've left with Caroline these leaflets if you would like to take one when you leave, which has been launched again just as part of that communication, trying to assist rural communities in particular, but all communities, because there's lots of good information there. If you want to take a leaflet and scan it, that'll take you through to a booklet, which will give you some really good information around how you can help and assist and get further assistance from a rural crime perspective. And there's a lot of good crime prevention advice in there as well. Moving on to equine there, so we have some mounted rural volunteers, and they are volunteers, but they're official, they're vetted, and they're part of the wider sort of policing family. They go out for patrols for up to 15 hours a week. They've got some fairly straightforward aims of their patrolling, and that's to provide some high visibility, to provide a presence and some reassurance, and also to identify vulnerable locations in which they do, and then feed back through to Country Watch and information intelligence back into the policing teams to help form that picture about what's going on in the rural areas. They're located across many areas within the counties, and through the Commissioner's Rural Emerging Needs Fund, we're hopefully looking to recruit a further 17 volunteers. And of course, when we say recruit, that also means that they need kit and equipment supported by the Commissioner to enable them to go out and do their job. Moving on to drones, there are a number of drones within Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary and also Thames Valley Police, because it's a joint sharing within the operations unit there around drones and their activity that allows them to be quite flexible around where those drones are deployed to. And this is something that I'm sure you'll see from news clips and other information you get is a real growing industry. I can't remember the last news clip that I looked at that didn't contain something of a drone footage, or of course you've got the DIY drone enthusiasts out there as well. But certainly a really good bit of equipment, and the again sponsored through some of the work of the Commissioner. The County Watch have their own drone pilots. And not only do they deploy these in rural areas, but they also form part of that wider joint operations unit capability. So, good example recently was Commissioner was talking about some of the force operations that are going on around Relentless, and there was one example of a suspect who jumped out of a window. As soon as the police had forced entry to his house, the drone was able to follow that suspect and guide officers on the ground to where the suspect was hiding in a garden. Unfortunately, I was unable to share this. I'd love to have put the footage on the screen for you all to see, but it's an ongoing case at the moment, so unfortunately I wasn't able to share that. But again, good example of where drones are being used in all weathers, all locations, night and day, to try and help policing operations on there. And I know the Commissioner is keen to scope further opportunities around the use of drones. So this is the final slide, just to recap for the last two agenda items around presentations for effective and efficient police service and performance delivery against the police and crime plan for unauthorised encampments and tackling rural crimes.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I like the curtains. All right. Right. We've got a number of members I've already got on the list who I promised I'd bring in at the beginning. So just to highlight who that is: Karen Lucioni from Isle of Wight, Alan Oliver from Hart, and Leslie Minahan from Gosport, and then Matt Renyard from Southampton will be coming back. Anyone else that wants to speak, please catch my eye or the Vice Chairman's eye, and we'll, right, let me just jot those down now before we move forward. So Martin Pepper, please keep your hand up. Anyone else after Martin around this side? Simon and Shirley. Right, okay, that's most of the panel. So let's kick off then with Karen.
It goes back, way back before this. I'm sorry about that, but I was very lucky to speak at ASB Awareness Week as a member of the LGA Safer and Stronger Board. And I just wanted to touch on, you spoke about Network Ride. Thank you for the work that you're doing with them. It really is around reassurance about partnership working. Actually, it's not just all about policing, and we need to make our communities resilient, and how important that is to you in your crime plan.
Thank you very much for raising that. And for those of you that don't know, when Councillor Lucioni says that she spoke at this ASB network, it was actually a national thing. So it was actually really quite a big deal, actually. And thank you so much for putting Hampshire and Isle of Wight on the map there in your LGA role, because I know that you gave examples of our good practice here and things that we're doing. And I'm grateful of the kind comments you made about me at that national conference as well. So thank you very much. Okay, so in terms of partnership working, yeah, thank you for raising it, because very often when things are going wrong in communities, particularly around antisocial behaviour, noise, disturbances, those sorts of things, the public's automatic reaction is to phone the police. And actually very often it's not, it's actually local authorities, but the police need to be supporting local authorities. So partnership working is very, very key for us. There are some really innovative examples of things that we are doing together. Your councils are doing a really good job. Your officers are working incredibly hard, and I know that funding, particularly for the district councils, is really, really, well, actually, for all councils, it's really tight, and we are going to do what we can. On this one, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Safer Streets Around 5 has just been announced, and the previously Safer Streets Around 1, 2, 3 and 4, bids could go in directly to the Home Office, but it just needed to have the Police and Crime Commissioner's signature and support on the application, but you could work them up. It didn't even have to be through a council, it could be a community group, it could be anyone. They've changed it now. I'm not really sure why. It's going to create quite a bit more work for me and my team, but all applications now have to be submitted by Office of Police and Crime Commissioners. But obviously, I don't know what needs to be done in all of your areas. So what we've done is we've written out to all of your council, so your community safety, your CSP chairs, cabinet members, actually I might have just gone to CSP chairs, but every council has been approached last week when this was confirmed that this is the new process. I think the closing date for applications is normally about 4 or 5 weeks. So my ask to all of you is please take it back to your councils, because parish, district, unitary, city, county, doesn't matter who you are, or a community interest group, I really welcome working with you in partnership, and my team will help to write the bid, because we know exactly how the Home Office like them, but what we need from you is the information and the why and the how you think the issue could be tackled. So please do take that back to your councils.
Thank you very much indeed, Donna.
Chair, I appreciate their questions for the Commissioner. I just thought it might be helpful. I referenced the restructure within the OPCC, and given the question was very much about Commissioner and OPCC commitment to partnerships. Just to reassure you, so as part and parcel of that restructure, we actually have one of our senior leaders, Kate Gunson, who is responsible for criminal justice commissioning and partnerships at a senior level. And also we have a senior partnership manager as well, Karen Dawes, who's got a very strong background in the community safety partnerships as well. And also the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, Terry Norton. A core component of Terry's role is very much around that engagement space in local partnerships as well. So hopefully that will assist in terms of demonstrating that commitment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Alan Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions. Shall I just do them in order? And
perhaps
I'll start and see how we go.
Throw them out there, and hopefully we'll get succinct answers.
They are quite short. First of all, very interesting presentation, and I'm just joined the panel today. I was looking at, you made an announcement about drug testing. I work in the justice system as a magistrate, so I'm very aware of the lack of support that the parole service has on drug rehabilitation schemes. Has any, shall we say, data been looked for in terms of the kind of volume that this is going to generate, and whether or not we are actually going to be able to help people that are found to be under the influence?
And did you say you had other questions too, Alan? Yeah. If you'd like to give them, so drug testing, answer that one. Yep.
I was very pleased to see that you saw that the abstraction of, shall we say, officers was a big issue with residents in terms of visibility of police, because if you're in a relatively low crime area like Hart is, abstraction is the big kind of issue that we see. Has anything been thought of in terms of reopening counters so that people who aren't satisfied with the online telephone reporting and the black hole that has become, can actually see a police officer without having to jump in front of a police car that hasn't got its blue lights on. And the third point is on, I was interested to see your piece on effectiveness and efficiency of the police force as one of your working streams. And I was pleasantly surprised I was very happy to see a new CCTV centre that we were part of in Runnymede. And they seem to have a different relationship with the Surrey Police Force in terms of integration of systems, where they are a trusted partner and can push to the police crimes that they see being committed, rather than wait for somebody to ring up and say, can you have a look at a CCTV cam? I wonder if there's anything in your work programme that is going to look for those kind of innovations with the Hampshire Police, and maybe we can get some advice from Surrey and look at best practice in that area. That's my 3 questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those interesting questions. Donna.
I will be succinct. I'm conscious there's a lot of people to get through. Drug testing on arrest. The pilot started in Basingstoke Police Investigation Centre. It ran last year for 6 months, so we knew the sort of volumes that would come out of it. Just to give you an example, from Portsmouth custody, in the month it's been running, there have been 17 referrals. So because we did the pilot in Basingstoke, we were confident we could stand it up across all the custodies in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight without it completely swamping the health colleagues in terms of that drug commissioning. So yes, hopefully that answers that one. And I will give you an update on that in due course if you want me to. In terms of the front counters, yes, your area, I'm really keen to work with you and your council on this one. We absolutely do need to have a front counter and almost an HQ in your council area. It's one of the areas we do have a deficit in terms of that public contact. I put £2 million into my budget in February this year to stand up front counters, and I've got a separate, bigger budget to actually acquire new neighbourhood police stations and sites on high streets. Yours probably would be the most suitable for the latter version of that one. So really keen to maybe work with you outside of the meeting if I can on that one. And the final thing, so what you've got in Surrey with the police is what we do actually have here in Hampshire. I'll explain that. It's a safer camera partnership. So colleagues on the panel that came to the visit just before you joined the panel to the control room a few weeks ago, we were able to show them exactly how, by having relationships with the councils and legal agreements through the contact management centre, when the weather 999 and 101 calls come in, you can literally in Southampton call in a park, zoom straight in, and Southampton City Council, Portsmouth City Council, there are a handful of councils in Hampshire where they have allowed access for the police through the control room directly to their CCTV networks. Now, because, and that used to happen with all of the councils as well, all the districts, because of austerity, the CCTV camera partnership, the Safer Camera, Hampshire Safer Camera Partnership, a number of district councils have made decisions over years, and completely understand why, because of money, to switch off those Safer Camera Partnerships, because you need the revenue cost of human beings sat behind in your councils looking at what's going on. Maybe 1 or 2 officers, but you need people looking, and the police will then liaise. And then, if there's been a stabbing, for example, in a park in Southampton, we're able to just lift that information directly because we've got access to their server and their information from our control room. At the moment, with councils that might have just a handful of cameras in their town centre, the police have to come into your council, download it. So it's not, the police can't automatically view the majority of councils in Hampshire remotely through the contact management centre, but we'd love to stand that up again. So what you've done with the Runnymede deal that you've been looking at, as has, I think, Rushmore, Hart, Basingstoke, I think there was a few of you up in the North East cluster that looked at that. If you are in that network with a proper 24-hour-a-day managed safer camera partnership, such as the Runnymede deal, there's absolutely no reason why Hampshire Constabulary can't then have that connection through the access requests, as we've got with the 2 cities and some of the other areas in the county. So please, if you are cabinet members, or you can take it back to your councils, we'd be really grateful to have those conversations with you. And the capability that you have at Runnymede is absolutely what Hampshire Constabulary could tap into.
I think
can I just come back on that?
Well, I think just to slightly clarify, I think what Alan was saying is it's a tapping into Surrey that you want to talk about, I think, isn't it, Alan?
No, I wanted the same system with Hampshire. It's just that the control centre is in Surrey. The CCTV control centre is in Surrey. I would just like some advice on what would be the best route in. Is it through the district? Is it through yourself or the district commander?
Either. Oh gosh, sorry, very close. Either. Yeah, I mean, I can connect you up with that. It's certainly something that, because there's been ad hoc, like for example in Andover, where I purchased a CCTV camera. It's the same as the Winchester situation, where your previous John, your previous district commander, had asked for some CCTV cameras. So I can give the police the capital monies to buy them, but the police are not registered as data controllers in terms of moving images in town centres. Councils are, and councils are best placed to own that data in your town centres. So if with those Winchester cameras, the reason there's been a bit of a delay in them going on to the high street is because I said, yeah, okay, I'll buy the 4 or 5 cameras that were asked for, but then for us we'd have to set up a whole data control strategy policy, have a dedicated officer from the Information Commissioner's office to hold those moving images because of RIPA law. So actually it does make a lot of sense that it's done through the council. That's now what's going on with Winchester. We're getting those agreements in place because we've got them. So in answer to your question, come through me if you want to and I will get you connected to the right person in the force. Your district commander may or may not know who that is, but email both of us if you like.
Okay, thank you. Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. 2 partnership questions. So we spoke about unauthorised encampments, and it's great that's gone down from 72 to 45 across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. Obviously in Gosport and Fareham we've seen a 200% increase in the first 6 months, for reference in 22 to 23. Referring to the success of the target hardened tin in the New Forest and Winchester, can you explain if there's any partnership work being undertaken by the police in Gosport and Fareham to achieve a similar success? And my second question relates to, there's a very real concern in our communities in relation to the unscrupulous businesses selling vapes to our young people. And I know the test purchasing for alcohol and cigarettes partnership with Trading Standards is very successful. I'm just wondering if Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Police are undertaking test purchase operations in relation to vaping with their colleagues from Trading Standards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those questions. Donna.
I'll start with the last one first, if that's okay. Test purchasing on vapes, I don't know. I can find out for you. It will be down to the local licensing police liaison with your licensing teams. I'm happy to ask the question. Your licensing officers probably would be able to tell you the same thing and whether or not the police are involved in that. If it's not happening and you think it needs, well, clearly you do think it needs to be, I'm happy to support. In terms of the target hardening, yes, I mean, whilst on there, it looks like it's great that it's 45 incidents of unauthorised encampments this year versus 72. That is from April year to date. So by the time we get to next year, I would expect the numbers to be a 72 or perhaps slightly higher. So please don't take that as a sort of 60% decrease. It's not. It's just because the date from which we start collating the data. So that is year to date. And in terms of the target hardening, yeah, when you have sites that are persistent problems, what will happen is your local liaison in your district, so it might be an inspector, a sergeant, or your district commander, will be feeding back to your environmental health officers around what they believe the target hardening should be. The New Forest have actually been really quite good at dealing with that, as have Basingstoke and Hart and some of the other councils you've just referenced. So yeah, you can always work with the police to say, how can we target harden these sites? Some sites are incredibly, well, they're almost impossible to target harden because they're big open spaces. And unless you want to block the public from having access, bearing in mind that unauthorised encampments don't turn up in the middle of the night, they turn up during the day, which is when you want the public to have unfettered access to land, which technically, they own through their council. So yeah, it's difficult, but if there are particular issues and vulnerabilities in your communities, then your district commander should be able to give you help and support on that.
Thank you. And
I
had a question.
Sorry, can I just add something to that as well? Also, the Gypsy Romney and Traveller officer here at Hampshire County Council was a very good, useful link as well in terms of assisting with that.
Okay. I noted myself to ask a question as well, which was going to be on travellers, so I do it at this point. I think the situations that we had in Fareham and Gosport, highlighted a sort of disparity between how they were dealt with, where we had the one at Cams, which was instant disposal, and in terms of using the powers, and at Bridgemerry, of course, where that didn't happen. I think what we need to see is consistency. in terms of how this is dealt with. And I think the bar needs to be clear. If you read the legislation and you look at how it is dealt with locally, there is sometimes a bit of a mismatch, because the legislation talks about issues with the community, numbers and criminality. And one would have hoped if you can tick all three boxes, then that should be it. And whereas we have this sort of back and forth, yes, today it doesn't comply, but tomorrow it might, and a few days later, and by the time those few days have been added, the local authority has probably dealt with the problem and it's into court anyway. So I think it would just be helpful to see a consistent approach, so we don't get, I don't hear from a colleague in Gosport where Wise Fareham had that done, and Gosport, it took a week and our pavilion was smashed to smithereens.
Yeah, so I know about both cases very well. As I said at the beginning, my assessment, understanding the legislation well as I do, is that the assessment of the police at the Nobes Lane in Bridge Mary was correct on day one. The community impact was not significant enough for the police to activate their Section 61 powers. However, it did get significant enough, I would argue, by day 3, when the pubs closed and there had been a level of criminality, because then it tipped the box. What happened was the force took 24 hours to mobilise at that point, and they didn't do that second assessment until day 4. So as I said earlier, on that one, the correct assessment was made on day 1, but it should have been done 24 hours earlier, which is why I fed that back to the force. Your situation, the community impact at Camsalder, was significant immediately because it prevented the public from being able to use the space for which it was intended, because you had a planned football tournament. So there are nuances here. I do get the point that you're making, Councillor Woodward, though, that there needs to be consistency. I think you're absolutely right about that. That hasn't always happened, and I think the Chief Constable is aware that through working with all of you and my undertaking on my police and crime plan, that I do have a real focus in this area, and that I will do whatever I can to try and ensure that consistency, as you say.
Okay, thank you very much. Matt, you're next.
I have 2 questions, but my second one was on the same subject, so I'll start with that one on unauthorised encampments. I'm really glad you pointed out the year-to-date figures, because I think that helped with clearing my question up for certain, because there's clearly a slight increase, actually, as we can see, in unauthorised encampments. I wonder if the PCC would revisit the strategy on this and go back to her earlier strategy, which was to have talks across the region with local authorities and looking at a shared temporary site approach. My feeling is that what we're beginning to see is an escalation, and certainly in Southampton last year we saw what started out as a lot of smaller groups culminate into one really large group that caused considerable damage and a real problem, when actually signposting to temporary sites can be a solution to that.
Thank you very much. And just for colleagues who aren't aware, one of the ideas that I had about managing the flow of unauthorised encampments is that one of the things that the police can do under their existing powers is that if an unauthorised encampment turns up somewhere and there is an identified site that they can move them to immediately, then they can do it straight away on that day. So what I'd said when I pulled a meeting together last year of all the councillors, cabinet members, borough solicitors who came along to it as well, was we could look at perhaps not the Isle of Wight, because thankfully you don't have this problem, but for Hampshire, with those including the unitaries, the 14 areas that have land, that we could actually look at having an on-call rota. So it might be that, for example, Eastleigh might be on call this month, and then it's Portsmouth, and then it's whatever. So that what the police could do, if an encampment turned up in Southampton, they would say, right, this is the location and postcode of the site that's available for unauthorised encampments for the next 28 days. You can go there. What that then means is the council would be able to get proper refuge, running water, sanitation, toilets, etc. Portaloo, so that there is adequate support for people who live choose to live in that way, which is of course is their legal right. And it does mean the council can then assess the sites, clear up at the end of the 28-day, 30-day period. I did put that to the council leaders last year and said, actually, this is a way that we could then prevent this. The downside of that, of course, is that if it becomes known across the UK, that you then might end up becoming a mecca. So I think that was the concern of council leaders at the time. I am really happy, Councillor Renard, to put this on the agenda for our September meeting, when you will all be there and so will your council leaders, and all the members of Parliament are going to be at that meeting as well. So I'm really happy to put that on there and to mute that again. There wasn't support for that actually at all. What it did go on to, and I'm not going to go into it now because it's too in detail and it's too detailed, you've got many questions still to go through, but it is something called an Article 4 direction. So if you have a specific issue, please get your borough solicitors, your monitoring officers, to get in contact with Test Valley's monitoring officer, because they have successfully gone to court and achieved an Article 4 direction, which is where as a borough you highlight your own piece of land, which is, theirs is like a giant lay-by effectively, and they got it on a temporary basis through the High Court. They went back to the High Court to say we want to make it permanent, and they were successful from my recall, and that was about 6 or 7 months ago. So this is all the work I've been doing with Number 10 as well, and with the Home Office lawyers and the special advisors, to be looking at how the legislation needs to be fit for purpose, and it's still not quite at the moment, the nuances in that legislation. But actually Test Valley Borough Council, there's another council who's done it as well. I think it's not Basingstoke, is it? I don't know who it is. There is another council who's done this in Hampshire, and a lot of your borough solicitors were on the call that I pulled together, and they, I said, look, these guys have done it. They're a Hampshire council, and actually that's what I was talking to Esther McVeigh MP about as well, because she knew that I'd done this, and the Home Sec said, speak to Donna about it, she can explain it, and so that she's going to look at getting that done in her own patch.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think actually things have changed for the worse where Test Valley is concerned, and they've lost their persons unknown bit of their injunction, which is making it very poor. In fact, Philip Lashbrook apologised. He had to leave early because they've got a traveller incursion in Test Valley right now. Matt, did you have another point?
Yeah, thank you for that answer. And Southampton will be exploring that. On the HMI CFRS report, are we likely to see some changes within the 101 triage process in terms of tackling that responding to the public piece, following the discussions that we had at Netley?
Yes, we are. So when crimes are reported online and through 101, they would go into what's called a triage hub, which was part of that assessment risk tool. That's the SARA tool. The Chief Constable has made decisions around how the resolution centre is going to work, and that is being worked through at the moment. So yes, there is absolutely going to be a difference for the 101, for the non-emergency calls, and that is something that we will go into when the Chief Constable's here, if that's okay, in your October meeting. But we would also touch on that in the September briefing for you as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Martin Pepper.
Hello, thank you, Chair. May I first just thank whoever's contacted the leader of Gosport Borough Council reference my voting this morning. I thank them for paying attention to my voting. I'm very pleased with that. But more importantly, unauthorised encampments. We've talked about Gosport on a number of occasions, and I thank you for using that as a case study, if you like. We had a meeting post the events with the local chief of police, and he was very clear that he thought that they should have acted much sooner, and they accept that now. So if in effect that horse has bolted, but he was significant, or his team was significantly tied down by the use of the term significant. My concern is if you drop significant completely, most of the residents will want anyone that's used as an encampment to be moved on immediately. And if you use something else, you're likely to be in the same position in 3 months' time because no one understood whatever the replacement to significant was. So unless we clarify this on two levels, actually, the police need to understand consistently what they're meaning, and the residents who have on the verge of no idea what the law allows. If we don't get those two in sync, we're going to have this problem every single time it comes along. The second point I have is I don't know how many legal sites for travellers there are across Hampshire. My understanding is that there are very few. And that makes it much more difficult to move people on, because if you move on people on quickly, they've got to go somewhere. They will go somewhere because they're travellers and they travel, and therefore they need to park up somewhere. So if we have, unless we've started to move on with that situation, we're going to just create yet more problems for ourselves. And they're the 2 points I would make. Common questions. The third one is CCTV partnership. We are hopefully going to have a link up with Netley very shortly. I don't know if, oh, that's a nod. Yeah, the Police Crime Commissioner is nodding. Oh, I see. Funded by the Police Crime Commissioner, I hope. No, you nodded now. That's too late. And that's it. Oh, apart from if you could give an update on how we're doing on the police building in Gosport, that would be helpful.
Was that me? Did I do something wrong? Make it beep. CCTV and Gosport Police Station. Okay, so the word significant is very significant, and you're absolutely right. The public do not understand, without being detrimental to some members of the public will know this very well, but there are many members of the public who do not understand the nuances of unauthorised encampment legislation, because it is very nuanced. That word significant, so the reason that is significant is because when police undertake their Section 61, 62 assessments, they have to be able to demonstrate legally and to be able to defend the force if they are sued, because that does happen if it's deemed that police forces are using their powers too easily, too lapsadaisically. And police forces, it's not unheard of that police forces are in the High Court defending themselves for the use. Effectively, there's an allegation that a particular protected characteristic has been targeted, Gypsy, Roma traveller communities, for example, and that's why there is nervousness around police forces, and they have to be really sure that it does tick, as Councillor Woodward has said, that community impact and or the prevention of crime if crime is then occurring associated to the site. So the word significant was due to not be included in the new legislation, which would have made it easier, because police forces would have been able to defend themselves easier if they were legally challenged. The word remaining in there is why the police are saying, well, yeah, okay, 6 cars, not 12, banned for 12 months, not 6, that's all good, but you've still got to get over that initial assessment in the first place. And the word significant remaining in the newly worded legislation, as same as it was in the old legislation, is why from the police assessment powers, that initial assessment has not changed. It's just then about what they can do afterwards if they meet the level. So that's why I was on the call to number 10 3 weeks ago before I went on leave. I came back from annual leave on Monday this week, so it's something I've got to pick up again next week with them, because that's something that they are really looking at, and the Home Office lawyers, I've spoken to them many times about this, they're aware of it. Just to clarify though, when something does happen, actually in the majority of cases across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, the impact, let's say it's around 30 to 40% of cases, the Section 61, 62 assessment is met. So therefore the majority it's not, and it is then down to local authorities to then go to court, prepare the paperwork and effectively evict from their land, which as you know takes about a week. So that's what happens. In terms of the temporary permanent sites, from memory, we've got about 4, I think, permanent traveller sites, as they're referred to, in Hampshire. One of obviously is Carousel Park, as you'll know, in your patch on the edge of Winchester. But people have a right to not go to a permanent site, but to be able to go to temporary sites. And so when I talked about what Test Valley had done with this designated piece of land, it wasn't a proper, like a Carousel Park area, it was a designated on a map, very big lay-by with adequate space around it, but it was deemed temporary from a planning perspective. So there is a real difference there from a planning perspective. Moving on to CCTV, yes, I've said it to all of you, this goes for all councils. I am happy to help fund and support if you're looking at the capital purchase of cameras. Of course, for you, the stress is around the revenue costs, right, of running the partnerships. But if it's around the capital, I would love you all to have those CCTV networks like we used to have. So where I can help, I'm happy to come to your council, sit down with your monitoring officer or whoever it is, your cabinet member directors, and work with you on that one. And Councillor Pepper, yes, I would love to take that forward with you. So just let me know and we'll move forward. Gosport Police Station, as I said to you before, plans are drawn up. We have a framework that we use through the county council for contractors. There's been some exploration done. I'm waiting for some figures back. My head of estates has been on leave the same as me, but it is kind of our number one priority now in our estates team to get that one moving forward. So I will come back to you ASAP on the police station and the front counter there in Gosport.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So on,
sorry, may I just add one further brief point?
Okay.
When the police said they did assessments of the sites, it was one visit per shift was what I was told was happening.
In terms of your Nobes Lane? Yeah, so what they will do is when there is an encampment, that's exactly the minimum they have to do, is go and do one proper walk onto the site, have a conversation, have a look around, see if there's any vulnerabilities that could be spotted. In reality, they'll be driving past, keeping an eye for, non-stop whilst the encampment is there, but they have to go on site and do a formal assessment once a day. That is correct.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned funding for CCTV. Does that include deployable CCTV, temporary cameras which are put in to a hotspot to gather data?
Yes.
Excellent. Simon.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got three questions really. First of all, just thinking about the slide that sort of talked about Peel report, Donna, one of the things you very kindly offered us at the last meeting was to find a way to share what was in development as far as the joint performance framework, which I suspect is the detail behind that says actually what's the progress, what's the detail, and seeing that. I don't know whether you'd had any thoughts about how we can have that conversation to make sure we do have that conversation and see the next level down. Number two, just building on the unauthorised encampment, I think the conversation for me just shows that actually the conversation we were having before filled a really important gap. I'm conscious of Basingstoke and Deane. We ended up with the first injunction in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, covering only 26 square miles, absolutely. But actually, if we didn't have that today, it's only 2% of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, but actually we had more than 50% of all encampments in that really small space. And it's really difficult to unpick. Masking quite a lot since that came in since July 2018. We had all sorts of issues about whether it caused displacement, and facts show that it didn't. And also, there's also stuff that we just have to be very careful about understanding what's going on. Pete, you were talking about the Wickham Fair. Actually, our injunction and our level of encampment actually had nothing to do with Wickham Fair, and that was more than 50% of them historically. But that's pre the figures that we've got, and just reinforcing that we've got all of that information in our local authorities to understand what's going on within that. So I think that'd be a really important conversation to restart. And lastly, just to pick up, your barn meets and rural, and that's a direct response from a request that we made, and that's really useful. I went to the Basingstoke and Deane barn meet, and it was really wonderfully received. Businesses were really picked up that they were visible on the radar of the police and the commissioner. Very positive. I just want to say one thing about DISC, because I'm conscious when you first came into your term, you talked about you'd heard the frustration from business owners about the difficulty reporting crime. And I think at that time you talked about, well, do you know what, let's think about whether we need an app. And what I've picked up from attending those meetings, but I think it might be really important for you to say is, actually, DISC, when used properly and adopted, does a lot of the stuff that you initially thought you needed a gap to fill. And actually, I think there's a bit of that narrative that hasn't been heard. I think some people are still waiting for you to do something rather than go, do you know what, DISC does 90% of this and it's really good.
Councillor Brown, that's incredibly helpful. Thank you very much. And I agree with you. For what they want and need, quick, easy, it's now two-way, whereas before it was only about putting, the force would give you information as a group of shop owners in a high street or a load of farmers in a certain area that there's red diesel theft going on or someone's just had a quad bike pinched. It was just one way flow of information from the force out. Now it's two-way, and the force has switched it on so that people can feed him back through the app and everyone else gets it. And I'm actually on DISC, so I get get all of the updates for the whole of the county through shops and rural as well. So thank you so much for that. Pete will take that away around the disc thing and pushing out the fact. The mobile app thing, as it happens, I did actually have a meeting on Tuesday this week with someone about I still love the idea of a mobile app for the public to be able to, because actually what would it do to the 101 service if we had an app? The calls would just stop, wouldn't they? Because everyone lives on their phones now. So you've got an issue. Would you phone 101? Some people will phone 101 if they've got additional needs, or they're older perhaps, or they just want to speak to a human being, which is completely understandable. But most people would just go onto an app and report it. It'd be so easy to do. It's an ongoing conversation with the police force, I'll say that, and perhaps we'll pick it up again in September. But at the moment, that is something I'm still quietly pushing away for. In terms of the I'm going to take them in reverse order. The local authority, the what you've done in Basingstoke. I knew there was another one up in that part of the county. Couldn't remember which council it is. This is exactly, it's a great example of what I'm saying about what are within local authority powers already to do. Test Valley and Basingstoke and Dean have done that. I mean, look, I'm here, I'll help, but actually these are powers that within your councils, probably for you guys to kind of pull yourselves together, as in do it yourselves, and we'll come, the police can turn up, I can turn up, but really this is something that local authorities need to get their head around, the legal powers you already have, and mobilise yourselves. If we can help, we will, but I thank you for raising that one. It's a very good example. Joint performance framework, yes, we haven't had any of the meetings yet. We haven't even signed it off. I've been off for the last 2 weeks, and then I got back at the weekend, and now the Chief Constable is off for now and next week. So I think August, Jason's been working with Lucy Hudson, Deputy Chief Constable. Within policing, that kind of joint performance stuff sits as a Deputy Chief Constable portfolio thing, and Jace is the kind of on that level with the Deputy Chief Constable. They've been working through that. Jace had a presentation of a final kind of like, this is how it could look and feel when I was on leave. He said to me yesterday that it looks really good. He thinks I'll be pleased with it. I haven't even seen it myself yet. So we will bring some stuff back as and when we've got that ready, when it's done.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll be taking 2 more people, the only ones who have shown so far, so we can then make some more progress with the agenda. It'd be Shirley Young and then Tonya Craig. Shirley.
Thank you, Chair. Donna, team, first of all, thank you for taking us hot foot through all the great work that's going on. It's really appreciated. Interestingly, a lot of the work and a lot of the success that you've detailed to us are things that I think are the bread and butter. It's that they're really local things. You've got local impact, local systems, and you're having great success. My area of interest lied around one of the working streams, which was the dedicated chief officer, focusing on increased public trust and confidence. What a poison chalice that is. Because, of course, no matter what you do locally and the good initiatives that you put in, you only need one rogue cop in Durham or Liverpool, and it blows to pieces your local trust and confidence. So very quickly, first of all is, how do you measure local trust and confidence? And secondly, what are the greatest obstacles that you do actually have to overcome, and how much is the challenge is that to you? Thank you.
I'll answer, and then I'm going to hand over to Pete to backfill if that's okay. So in the Chief Officer group, we had 4 Assistant Chief Constables, the Deputy and the Chief Constable. That's changed. So Scott Chilton has changed that now. So what you've got is 3 Assistant Chief Constables, a Deputy, a Chief Constable, and that 4th ACC portfolio is now led by a Chief Officer, but it's not a police officer, it's a member of police staff who is at chief officer level. His name is Ben Pratt. So he's taken on the change programme for the force around the new operating model. He's got all of the front counters and police stations, so all the stuff to do with like Heart and where we're looking at sites and Gosport. He's working with my estates team on all of that stuff. So there's a whole load of work going on behind the scenes. So he is not a police officer, but it's his job to really help drive up that trust and confidence. Now, how do the police measure that, to answer your question, is around surveying, it's around going to public meetings, it's around victim satisfaction survey, it's all of that sort of stuff that they do behind the scenes. It is incredibly difficult to measure though, because, you could really engage with, let's say, the Eastleigh WI, you get great feedback from them because one of them has been a victim of crime and now they understand what goes on better. And so if you survey them as a community group, but then you could go into the next door building, the next door meeting room in a village hall, and they would be, no, we don't see that at all. A men's shed, for example. So it's so difficult to measure how it's genuinely improving. But police forces do survey on the satisfaction of the service that the public get from police forces every year. So that's mainly how they do it. Pete, I don't know if you wanted to add anything into that.
Yes, so I know that the force has looked at, it's guidance only, but I think it is available open source, is National Police Chief Council's Neighbourhood Policing Performance Framework, which is quite a read, but it does actually set out some guidance for police forces about how you can measure things like trust and confidence in other areas. And I haven't got all of them now, but I did note that it sort of ranges from, as the Commissioner said, from community meetings through to confidence and satisfaction scoring. But I think there's also a view or an observation now around perception as well. So not just trust and confidence, but also perception, because actually you could ultimately, and there could be a number of reasons why you have trust and confidence in the police or not, but your perception of what you might do as a result of that could change. So a good example of that is that I might take a view that I don't think if I'm going to ring the police up that they're going to investigate my criminal damage to my fence. Now that could be a perception, because actually there could be a lot of local investigations around criminal damage if there's a spate of criminal damage, for example. But actually, my perception is that if I call the police, they're not going to investigate a crime. But that wouldn't necessarily stop me calling the police. So therefore, there's trust and confidence, I think, very much going in the direction of including perception, public perception into that as well. Because actually, if there's a gap between reality and perception, then that can be filled or maybe educated in different ways. So my perception might be something which is not actually the truth, but actually there's a reason why I've got that perception. Could be a number of different reasons. So I just wanted to add to that. We use trust and confidence, but perception is important as well in terms of how I view as a member of the community.
Okay, thank you. Happy with that, Shirley. Thank you. Tonya, final one.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things. Partnership working, we've mentioned that and how it really works. Do we still have meetings about travellers? We used to have the district meetings. Are they still going? Because I haven't had an invite for those for quite some time now. And I have questioned it at parish council meetings and said, can you ask whether they're still going? Haven't had any feedback. Question on that, if you have a transit site in your borough and you get an encampment, can you move them quicker onto those transit sites? There's the other one. Oh, it was on the updates. Shirley's just brought up about people having that perception of the police don't do anything at all. Some of the things that I'm getting is if we had an update, then we'd know something was happening. So I don't know whether that can be put on Facebook pages that kind of answer some of those. But, people just say, oh, they give me a crime reference number and that's it. You get on with it. Whereas if they had a phone call or an update or something, they may actually realise that there is work going on in the background. And just, we're trying not to feel like a broken record. Donna, I've asked so many times if we can have your report beforehand. The chair's report, I've not seen sight of the chair's report, so I was trying to make notes and update. But I hadn't seen sight of Donna's announcements beforehand. And it does, because she speaks fast and so many things to cram everything in, it scrambles my brain even with trying to write notes.
Okay, I'm sure that will be noted. There was something circulated for Donna, but that was the presentations, wasn't it, Caroline? Okay, Caroline will look into that. We think we had something. Okay, Donna, would you like to pick up the other? The joint Gypsy Traveller Liaison panel was a local authority panel, which I believe does still exist, but it doesn't meet very often. That used to be, I think it was Havant, Winchester, Eastleigh, Fareham, Gosport was certainly a group, but I don't think there's anything happening. Donna, have you got any points you'd like to answer, please?
Thank you very much. Good points. In terms of my announcements, it was a document that looked like that. We've sent them through for the last two meetings, I think, two meetings. So if you haven't got it, I can send this to you, directly. Could you do that, Pete? Marisa, could you do that to Councillor Tonya Craig? So that's got everything on there. I basically just kind of went through it, so you can then have that to keep a reference of. But yes, they were sent through in advance. I understand. a spider's web. No, we'll get that sent to you, so you've got a copy of it again. In terms of the district meetings, I think Councillor Woodward's answered that one. So yes, I'm not aware of that. We obviously, as a police and crime plan, the pledge I'd made separate to your council traveller meetings. Because I've got it as a pledge in my police and crime plan, we obviously held the meetings that I arranged last year with the borough solicitors and all that kind of stuff. So we'll carry on supporting where we can, but I think it sounds like it might be Hyolga or perhaps the transit site question. Yes, immediately. If there is a site that the police can say direct them, you must go straight away, and if they don't, then as long as it's all done lawfully in terms of there is a regulated site, which is the designated temporary site, be it for a 28-day period or a permanently designated temporary site, then it can be moved on immediately. And if not, then they would call, for example, hunt garages and say, right, come and tow away. So yes, that can be done. And the social media point around the feedback when there has been an assessment carried out and what the police are doing when they've been reported. Marisa, my head of comms, is over here, so I'll ask her to feed, because that would be for force comms to do when they've gone and done the assessment, to say, right, we've done the assessment, it meets the threshold or it doesn't. So Marisa, if you wouldn't mind feeding that back to Assistant Chief Constable Paul Bartolomeo, who will have to feed that back to his district commanders so that they put that on their locals, like Eastleigh Police Facebook page or something. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, there was one bit that missed out in the little squeeze that I've been writing in. It was, you were saying about whether they become an urgent site or not. I mean, we've had 4 or 5 encampments in Eastleigh in the last month, which has been pretty horrendous. But the one that sort of has been the worst is an encampment on Greta Park, actually in Hedge End Village. Now that causes the biggest impact to the most amount of people, because not only does it shut the park to where we have a lot of dog walkers and people exercising, but they send the children into to the barbers and have haircuts and then just walk out and won't pay. They shoplift from the co-op, they shoplift from Greg's, they go into the chemist and steal things from there as well. So it has a massive, massive impact on that one area. But we still had to go through the whole thing of putting in court to get them off and then wait and wait and wait. So all the time it's got this massive impact, it's just escalating. So I just don't understand why we had to wait so long when it had such a big impact.
It sounds on the face of it that the section 61 or 62 should be met through the crime and impact on the community. Helen, who is DCI, Helen Wilkie, who's here as my staff officer. Helen, can we look into that Greta Park site in Eastleigh and look at, because it sounds like the assessment's been done, the police have determined it hasn't met the threshold, which is why you're having to go through the local authority rigmarole through court. Can we just look at that one, and then can you copy me in as well to the response to Tonya? If once Helen's looked at it, she thinks that perhaps the district commander, might need to look at it again, then we can get that done, and then I can also, sometimes my interest in sites might sharpen the pencil somewhat, so we can work with you on that one.
I want to see whether it was the district that missed out on doing something that the police had told them, or, it didn't meet the criteria for whatever reason. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So that brings us to several recommendations that we just need to deal with first. So item 10 was first of all, item 9, Donna's announcements. Thank you for those, Donna. Item 10, Police and Crime Commissioner, Effective and Efficient Policing. We heard the presentation. We're asked to that the update on effective and efficient policing is noted. Is that agreed? And obviously questions have been asked. Then item 11, which is the police and crime plan. We've heard the presentation. We've had the discussions and questions. The recommendation is the update on that is noted. Is that agreed? Okay, thank you very much. And that brings us to item 12, which
Sorry, Chair, just before you move on, I've got a bit of an issue bubbling in the background here, which I may just have to disappear.
Okay, all right, that's understood. Thank you. Right, item 12 is the Police and Crime Panel Annual Report. This is pages 19 to 36 of your agenda. There's a list of recommendations which has been agreed by the panel across the previous year. Caroline has been working with the OPCC to confirm a response to each. They will be appended to the annual report, and that will demonstrate the outcomes and effectiveness of our scrutiny of the PCC. That will be shared at our meeting in October. A forward, Chairman's forward, will be added after the draft is agreed by members. So can I just say, on that, do members have any questions on that annual report that they'd like to ask? I'm looking, I see none. Then in that case, recommendations on page 19, we receive and agree the report, and then following a forward from the chairman, it will be published and circulated to all local authorities in the policing area. Are those recommendations agreed? Thank you. That brings us then on to item 13, which is pages 37 to 42 in your papers. And this outlines the complaints made against the PCC in the last 12 months. Are there any questions on that report? Then, if there are not, then the recommendation is that the annual complaints report is noted. Is that agreed? That's good. We're making up time now. Right, item 14 is the Police and Crime Panel financial monitoring, and that is on pages 43 to 48 of your paperwork, and that's a report from the finance officer to the panel. That's Jonathan Treyer, which monitors the panel's budget for 22-23 and the part year performance against 23-24 and the proposed budget for 24-25. So are there any questions from members on that report? And if there are not, then the recommendations on page 43 are there, which is noting 22-23, which is obviously history, noting the current performance and agreeing the budget for 24-25, subject, of course, to confirmation of the government grant. Is that those recommendations agreed? Thank you. Then we move to item 15, which is page 49 onwards on your agenda, and this is the subcommittee and working group arrangements, and there is a report from Caroline outlining those proposed arrangements, revised terms of reference and membership. This is if we wish to continue as at present with a complaints subcommittee, a policy and performance working group, and a precept for 24-25 task and finish group. So I guess the first question to ask is, are members happy to continue with those three panels that we have at the moment? I'm not seeing any dissent. And then that brings us to the terms of reference for those panels as laid out. Are members content with those as written? Yes? Okay. Then we move to membership, which is the interesting one. Now, volunteers were sought, and volunteers are always a good thing rather than pressed men or women. So for the complaints subcommittee, which is a committee of 5 members, the suggested sort of breakdown as members on that is an independent co-opted member, and the volunteer is Shirley Young, and a Labour member, Tony Jones, and a Conservative member, which is me, and there are 2 gaps in there, which is for another Conservative member and a Liberal Democrat member. So, working from the second one first, is there a volunteer Liberal to go on to the complaints panel? Don't all jump at once.
Chair, I will propose, I put myself forward as a volunteer for that.
Chairman of the panel will not be a member.
If there's no other.
We don't have to do what's suggested, do we? Right. Sorry, please say that again.
I put myself forward.
Okay. Everyone happy with that? Okay, thank you. A volunteer. Wonderful. Can I have another Conservative volunteer? Leslie Minahan. Content with that? Okay, the complaints panel then is now replete. In terms of, just to clarify this, maybe it's one for Peter, chairmanship of the complaints subcommittee, and I know that was Dave Stewart as an independent co-opted member. Peter, is there something? Well, he's not, because obviously we've got Shirley now, but my question is in terms of who chairs the complaints subcommittee. Is there any particular legislative requirement, or can that be any of the members?
Effectively, it can be any of the members that are there at the time.
Okay, all right. So, and so second question, Peter, is that for the panel to agree when it meets, or is it for us to impose? Looks like we're running around with some bits of paper, and we'll clarify that momentarily. I'm asking what is legislatively required, not anything else. We will get there.
Caroline's very kindly showed me page 55 of your bundle, which says that actually the chair has to be from the appointed independent candidate.
Okay, well, given that you're on there now then, Shirley, are you happy with that onerous task? Okay, thank you. So if we move now to the Policy and Performance Working Group, we've got 5 volunteers for 5 positions, I'm told. So Vice Chairman, Councillor Minus-Bound, Councillor Gregori, Councillor Oliver and Councillor Renyard. Just confirm they're all happy to serve. Then that, if we all agreed, is done. And then the other group, this is the Precept Task and Finish group, and we don't, or I'm not aware of any volunteers for this one. 5 volunteers, please. Probably on that same basis as we did for the other panels. Karen. So we'd be looking ideally for, I guess, an independent member. We've got any more volunteers for the Precept group? Martin Pepper. More. We can do as we wish. Jason, are you happy to do it? Thank you. You're on. Any more? Okay, well, let's take what's there and we can always add to it. If somebody should wake up in the morning and think, I wish I'd done that one. So that is that one. So the recommendations then, which we have agreed as we've gone along, so we continue the panels, we've appointed the panels, and the terms of reference of the panel. So that's all confirmed. Thank you very much. And then item 16 is the... Oh, sorry.
Could I just ask, is there a schedule of dates for both this panel, the working groups? I've asked the officer, and there's only 2 at the moment for the policy and performance. Can we have an annual one? Because some of us have diaries.
Okay, well, we'll ask Caroline to circulate dates for anything and everything, conscious of the fact we do have new members. And I think it's probably most appropriate then that the panels set their dates, so you'll know it's convenient for everybody who's meeting. Of course, the complaints one gets generated by if there is a complaint, but the other ones, of course, you can set the dates when you get together, maybe for the first time. Okay, right. Item 16 is the Police and Crime Panel Work Programme, which is pages 65 through to 74, and ask whether you have any questions or comments, and if not, that we agree it. I see nothing. Is that agreed? Okay, well, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the meeting at 12:30, as planned.